All righty, what is going on, everybody? Looks like we got a few more people trickling in. All right, everybody, welcome back to another videography webinar. I'm your host, Dan. Today, we're going to be talking all about audio. So for those of you who were not here last week, my background is I've been a professional videographer for about 10 years now. I'm the videographer here at Serviceside. And I actually have a degree in audio engineering. It's what I went to college for. I used to work in recording studios. So audio is my bread and butter and has been for quite some time. So today we're going to talk about obviously everything related to audio. The three main things we are going to cover today are going to be how I like to capture my audio, what I do when I process my audio, and then also kind of some tips and tricks for editing audio. First up, I will be working in Davinci Resolve today. I'll be working in the audio panel on that software. So again, like I said, with everything that we're going to be doing with this videography series, I'm going to be working in Davinci Resolve. So a lot of these concepts, again, will be able to be applied in pretty much any software. But if you want to follow along, go ahead and download that free version of Davinci Resolve, or if you want to pay for the studio version, that is like a $300 purchase or something like that. You don't necessarily need to do that, but again, I am working in Davinci Resolve. So let's jump right into it here. We're going to talk about capturing audio first. So the big thing for me is there are multiple different ways that you can capture audio while you're recording in the woods. And for me, there are two main options. That first one is going to be like your on-camera microphone, which if you are just kind of running and gunning, that's probably the best option for what you're going to be doing, because that way you don't have to worry about like moving microphones around and stuff like that. Rode makes some really good ones. I use a Sennheiser MKE 600. That's a little bit higher than what I would recommend for most people. For most people, I would recommend like a Rode VideoMic Pro or Rode VideoMic or something like that. Those just have a little internal battery in them, and then they just plug right into the microphone port on your camera, and then everything stays synced up so you don't have to worry about syncing your audio later like we talked about. Yes, as Torin just mentioned in the chat, if you guys haven't seen that, if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in that chat. I'll do my best to answer your questions as we get them. But if you have any questions, go ahead and just pop them in that chat and I'll try to answer them the best that I can. So going back into capturing audio, like I said, the best option for me personally would be to do like an onboard shotgun microphone, like a Rode VideoMic Pro or Rode VideoMic or something like that. The other option is something like a lab or a lavalier mic. And these are great options if you're going to be filming yourself, or if you're going to be filming the same person, like for the majority of what you're doing. My preference for that is the Rode Wireless Go 2s. You can mic up two different people and it syncs back into one receiver, and it goes right again into the headphone jack the microphone jack of your camera. These are great because they do have a built-in microphone on them, but you can also plug like your typical lavalier that you would want to clip onto your shirt into them. The big thing that I like about the Rode Wireless Go 2s is the fact that they record to these body packs. So the way that these work is when these get connected to the receiver, they automatically start recording a backup file directly to the unit here. And then what you do is you plug it into your computer via the USB-C port that's on here using the Rode application that sits on your desktop. And then you can pull those files off if you need to. So like if you had a dropout or something like that, or like the receiver just didn't pick up correctly or something, you have a source file on the body pack that you can just pull right off. That's the main reason why I like these. And again, these just go right into that microphone jack. So again, you don't have to line up any audio. Now, if I want to capture something that's like really, really high end, or I want to make sure that I'm capturing the best possible audio like possible, then I'm going to be using what's known as a tentacle sync. This is their Track E. This is a 32-bit float recorder. And what that means is essentially you cannot clip these recorders. Like, it doesn't matter how loud you go or how soft you go, you're not going to clip the audio on here. The downside of using something like this is then you do have to then synchronize the audio in post, which is a little bit of an extra step. So Dylan, that's a great question. And Matthew also mentioned that the Rode VideoMic NTG is a great shotgun mic. I personally really, really like the stuff that Rode puts out. Rode makes some really good quality stuff for not a whole lot of money, and it's really great for, you know, just any your like average filmmaker who just needs to capture good quality audio but doesn't want to spend a bunch of money. Rode is definitely the way to go, whether that's their on-camera microphones, their labs. I've been using their products for years. Now, Dylan's question is capturing the audio on your phone with a lot of wind going on. And that's a great question because we're obviously going to be outside a lot, and there's a lot of places that are going to be pretty windy. Now, specifically with your phone, there are a couple different options that you can get. There are lav mics that plug directly into the phone that you have. It plugs right into like the microphone port. Now, depending on the phone that you have, there are also microphones that you can get that'll plug, like for the iPhone, they'll plug right into that lightning connector on the bottom. Rode makes a bunch of stuff for that as well. But as far as keeping wind noise down, this applies for whatever microphone that you use, you want to put some kind of what I would refer to as like a windbreak over top of them. The technical term for what we call them in the industry is a dead cat, because that's kind of what they look like. They're fuzzy and they're furry. I don't know if I have anything in my little audio bag here that's like that, but oh, there we go. So this is like the little wind muff dead cat thing for the Rode Wireless Goes. And as you can see, it's got all these little like fibers on it. And what that does is that kind of breaks up the wind. Now, depending on how bad the wind is, you may not be able to like break all of it up. But if you have the option to buy like a dead cat or something for your microphone, I would do that. But if you don't have that option, or if you're really in a pinch, something that I've done is I've actually taken socks and put them over top of the microphone. It doesn't work 100% of the time, but it does cut down on a lot of the wind noise, because what happens with wind noise in your microphone is the wind is actually pushing the capsule inside the microphone, and that's what gives it that really low like rumble, and it's kind of just blowing everything out. So the more that you can break up that wind, the better. It's kind of the same reason why you see in recording studios, like when a singer is in front of a microphone or somebody's recording a voiceover, they have that like circular thing that sits in front of the microphone. That's actually called a pop filter. And what that does is that actually breaks up the wind or the air coming out of the vocalist's mouth. And that way it doesn't overload the capsule, giving you that bass bump. Now, some things to keep in mind when you are capturing your audio. You want to get your microphone as close to your source as you possibly can. So this is where you kind of have those pros and cons of having an onboard microphone versus an offboard microphone, right? So like if you want to set your tripod up like 15 feet away from whatever you're filming, then your audio capture is also going to be 15 feet away from your source. And that comes with a couple different things. One, it's not going to be as loud because you're further away from the source. And two, it's not going to sound the same with frequencies. And we'll look a little bit into that more a little bit down the road when I talk about the processing of the audio, because we'll look at like some EQ stuff. So you want to get that microphone as close to your source as possible. And again, you don't want to have it be too far, or you're not going to get the kind of audio quality that you want. So for something like a lav microphone, what I like to do is I like to clip it kind of right underneath of the chin, like as close to the chin as I can get it. And I like to do it in the center. And the reason I like to do it in the center is because it stays the same distance from your mouth, regardless of which direction you turn. So if I put this microphone, if I clipped it over here on my hoodie over here, you know, it would sound great when I was here, but every time I turn my head this way, the volume would increase on this side. And then when I go to the other side, the volume is going to decrease because I'm talking away from that microphone. However, if I clip it right in the middle, then it stays pretty much the same distance away from my mouth, regardless of which direction that I'm talking in. So you'll see on all the videos that we do, I actually usually clip it kind of sideways like this on a shirt. And then that way it captures from all directions, because the lavalier microphones are what are known as omnidirectional microphones. And that means they pick up from all directions. Your microphones typically have 3 different polar patterns. There's 3 like standard polar patterns. And what that means is like what the pattern of the frequency pickup is on the microphone. So you have your cardioid, which is like your standard kind of microphone, like those like handheld microphones that you see on stages and that kind of stuff. Those are called a cardioid microphone. And the reason why is because the pickup pattern is shaped very much like a heart. You then have your figure 8, which picks up a big lobe in the front, and then it picks up another big lobe in the back. And then you have your omnidirectional, which picks up equally from all directions. So typically your lav microphones are what are known as omnidirectional. So they'll pick up from all directions. So you won't have like a frequency drop or anything like that. Your onboard shotgun microphones or your onboard camera microphones are shotgun microphones, and shotgun microphones pick up in what's known as a supercardioid pattern, which is basically the same thing as a cardioid pattern, but with a more narrow focus in the front. So what that means is your shotgun microphone, whatever it's pointed at, it's picking up like a tube essentially of audio, and then you can kind of move that around with your camera. So like Dylan asked earlier, with picking up stuff with wind, we have a couple different options. We have like that dead cat option, and we have our sock option if we don't have the option for a dead cat on our microphone. The best way to kind of mitigate wind is to turn your back to it, like the subject to have their back to it. So like if I'm talking on camera to you guys and I had like a lav clipped to me, I would want this lav clipped here, and then I would want the wind at my back. Now, if I was recording on camera, like with an on-camera microphone, I would obviously want the opposite of that, because if my wind is coming from my back directly into the microphone, then it's just going to hit right into the microphone, and all you're going to hear is the wind noise. So then we would want to flip around and do it the other way around. So you'll also notice when you're recording audio, whether it's on a camera or on your phone or something like that, you're going to have a meter that gives you kind of your audio level readout. And there's 3 colors on those meters typically. There is your green, which is your safe zone. You have your yellow, which is kind of like your quote unquote danger zone. And then you have the red, which is clipping. The way that I like to record is I like my audio to kind of tap that red a little bit. That way I know I have the most, what's called headroom, or basically the most signal to noise ratio in order to be able to manipulate that in post. So we want to make sure that we're recording like kind of in that yellow range, right? So that way we have enough volume to turn it up and down, but not so much that it's blowing out the microphone and blowing out our speakers, and not so little that if we try to turn that volume up, then we just hear a lot of noise. Now, going into the noise conversation, there is something that's very important known as gain staging. And what gain staging means is essentially distributing the gain or the volume across multiple different points in the signal chain. So when I refer to something known as a signal chain, that is literally what the chain of processing is from the source of your audio all the way into the recording device. So for a typical lavalier setup, your signal chain is the microphone into the wireless system, and then the wireless system into the camera. And that camera is your recording device. Now, if I wanted to increase the volume on that, what typically people would do is they would try to go like into the camera or onto the microphone and crank the audio up to 10 or as high as it can go if they're not getting the right volume. Now, the downside of that is you're probably going to get a lot of noise. And the reason for that is because you're pushing the preamps or the capturing device of your recorder, you're pushing that as hard as it can go. So instead of taking your microphone and putting it to 10 or your capture device and putting it to 10, you would want to put your microphone to 5 and then your capture device to 5, or like right in the middle. That way we evenly distribute the gain or the volume throughout each stage in the signal chain. You get a little bit more gain staging when you have like other different capture devices. So you have, like when I was in audio school and we were working in the recording studios, like we had the microphone that went into the mixing board, and then the mixing board had a whole bunch of different processing on it, and then the mixing board went into outboard gear, and we had a whole lot of different gain staging options. And also keep in mind that you don't have to necessarily capture, this is kind of tricky to say in a way that makes sense, but you don't necessarily have to capture audio at the highest possible volume all the time. And the reason I say that is because when you bring it into post-processing, then you can also increase that volume. Now, when we get into the actual processing of our audio, we'll take a look at the levels and stuff of where I try to make that. And actually, Matthew just put something in the comments, and that's actually exactly where I like to keep my volume for my audio. So when I'm looking at the meters in Resolve, and I'll show you guys this in a second, I like to get my speech audio right around that -6 dB range. To me, that is just where it sits really nicely. It's not too loud, it's not too soft. Like I don't have to go in and crank my volume on the YouTube videos or anything like that. Like it sits right where it's gonna be. So let's see if I can make my show you guys my screen here. Let's see what we got. And we're going to go ahead and head into Davinci Resolve. So hopefully you guys can see this. And if we don't, just let me know and we can kind of figure that out. But like I said, this is the Davinci Resolve audio panel. So here we have, let me move this out of the way because I don't need that over there. Typically we have our audio here, and then we have other audio sources over here. Just real quick, just so you guys know, in Davinci Resolve, we have these panels down here at the bottom. And you can see as I hover over them, they'll give you kind of the readout, but we have our media panel here, which is how we import all of our stuff. Then we have our cut page, which is for like when you want to quickly edit stuff together and just like put your, basically, this is how I pre-do my timelines. Like I put everything in chronological order here. And then we have our edit page. And then we have our Fusion page, which I probably won't be going into much, at least for right now, because this stuff gets really, really complicated. Then we have our color page, and then we have our audio page, and then we have our output page or our deliver page. We're going to be working in our audio page or our Fairlight page. All right. So when we talk about audio processing, there are really two main processes that we're going to be doing, and those are EQ and compression. Now, in kind of layman's terms, EQ is just the manipulation of frequencies for your audio file, and compression is taking the highs or the peaks of your audio source and bringing them down closer to what is the standard or the average volume for your audio. So here in Davinci Resolve, you have these kind of built in already. So on this audio track here, you'll see that I have a bunch of different processing. And you'll notice that I actually have some processing before other processing. And there's a specific reason for that. I like to have a little bit of compression spread out. I like to take my compression and I like to do a little bit multiple times instead of doing a lot of it all at one time. So you'll notice that I actually have 3 different compressors over here. Now, I do 3 different compressors because I'm a bit extra when it comes to processing my audio and I know what these sound like. So these have a very specific sound that I'm searching for. We don't necessarily need to do that for just like speech audio. So if we take a look at our EQ here, I purposely left this flat so that I can kind of show you guys what I do for my EQ. Now, when we talk about EQ, we have what are known as bands, and that is literally just the frequency difference that it'll pick up, or the frequency range rather that it'll pick up. So one of the first things that I do on basically every single speech audio track is I take a low cut filter. So you'll see here, this is what's known as a low cut because it cuts off the lows. And what I do is I take this and I move it to about 100 hertz. And the reason that I do that is because basically anything that's below 100 hertz, especially in speech audio, is not going to be useful for you. All it's going to do is make things kind of sound rumbly. And it's not going to sound very good, and it's going to be almost too bassy, right? So we don't want to have too many low frequencies, because when we get down into those super, super low frequencies, stuff starts to interfere with each other and it gets really messy really, really quick. Now, another thing I like to do is I like to take a high pass, which is essentially the same thing as a low pass, but the opposite. It lets the highs pass through and the low pass lets the lows pass through. So we're taking now a low pass filter here at the top, and I'm going to switch this to a shelf. And what I like to, and the reason I call it a shelf is because, well, when I pull it up, it looks like a shelf. Make sure here that way I then have the option to lift the high frequencies here. And I do this just to add like a little bit of brightness to the speech. You don't want to do this too high or too low, because then you get into stuff that kind of sounds tinny and it hurts your ears. Now, another thing that is very, very beneficial for you is what's known as sibilance. And you can kind of probably hear that as I'm talking now. And the sibilance is your S's and your C's. So when somebody's talking and it sounds like hissy, that is your sibilance. And the sibilance sits right around the 8K frequency range. So that way, you know that if like you're sitting there and you're listening to something and it sounds like really, really hissy while they're talking, you know that you can come into the 8K range and pull that down. Now, for all the other frequencies in our EQ, I kind of do it on a case-by-case basis. Now, over time, I've learned that certain frequencies make certain sounds. So if I have something that sounds a certain way, I just based off of the things that I've learned over the years, I know exactly where to go in my frequency bands to fix that. There are charts online. I'll make sure that you guys get a copy of a good chart so you can kind of see what that looks like. But usually what I do is it's as simple as grabbing whatever band I'm working with and I pull it all the way up. Now, the reason I pull it all the way up is so that I can hear exactly what I'm listening to. And then after I pull it up, I kind of scan around where I think the frequency needs to be that I'm trying to get to. And once I find that, I like to pull the bad frequencies down and push the good frequencies up. So if I have something that sounds too like boxy or too muddy, I'm going to come around the 500 hertz range. I'm going to pull it all the way up till I find the frequencies that sound the worst, and then I'll pull it down somewhere between 3 and 5 dB. Now, you have a couple different options with your processing here. Obviously, you have your gain, which is how much or how little you're pulling out. You have your frequency, but then we also have this thing called a Q factor. And what that means is it is how small or narrow or how wide that cut is. So I typically will take that Q factor and I'll make it as small as I can, or as high as I can rather. So that way I can really pinpoint my frequencies, and then I'll pull it down at the bad frequency and then kind of expand it out a little bit so that it doesn't sound as weird or as harsh or something like that. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing my screen because I can't see if there's anything in the chat at all, or maybe I can, hold on. All right, cool. So we don't have any questions in the chat on EQ. So again, if we have any questions on anything that I'm saying, drop them in the chat here. I will do my best to answer them as best as I can. I know I'm spitting a ton of information at you, and it can get a little nauseating. And yes, ringing out the monitors for the live sound people. That is a very, very good analogy. But yeah, if you guys have any questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat. I'll do my best to answer them. Like I said, I know I'm spitting a ton of information at you, and I know that it can get overwhelming really quickly. So if you guys have any questions, go ahead and throw them in the chat. I'm going to throw this over here so that I can see that while I'm talking. Okay, so now we're going to talk about compression. And again, I left this blank so that I can show you guys what this is doing. So compression, again, is literally just taking the peaks in your audio file or the peaks in your audio and bringing them down closer to the average. So when we do our compression, we have our 6 or 5 rather different settings. We have our threshold, which is the level at which the compressor is going to start engaging, or the volume at which the compressor is going to start engaging. Then we have our ratio, which is how much it is going to compress the signal. And then we have our attack, which is how fast that compressor is going to kick in when it reads that peak. Our hold is how long it's going to hold that compression. And then the release is how quickly it lets go of that compression. So the threshold is obviously going to happen on a case-by-case basis, depending on what your input level is. And then your ratio for speech, for pretty much across the board for speech, I don't go over 3 to 1. Because if you go over, when I find that whenever you go over a 3 to 1 compression ratio, it starts to sound really weird. And it just doesn't sound right to me. When I'm editing audio or I'm processing audio, my goal is to make it sound as natural and as pleasing as humanly possible. And if the audio doesn't have some of those natural dynamics in it, it's going to sound weird. Like when you talk to somebody, there's naturally a little bit of difference in the volume in how you're talking, depending on what the word is. And if everything is the exact same volume, it's going to sound really, really weird. So you kind of you want to bring those dynamics closer together so that they're not crazy all over the place, so that when the soft parts are too soft and the loud parts are too loud, but you don't want to overdo it so that everything is the same volume and you lose all of your dynamics. So like I said, I like to usually put this, I kind of park my ratio at about 3 to 1, and I just kind of leave it there. And like I said, with the threshold, that is going to be dependent on a case-by-case basis. So if I take this audio file here, and this is something we recorded a while ago, and this is Jimmy talking, I'm going to go ahead and turn my compressor on, and you'll see that my threshold is this kind of I'll bring it back over here. It's kind of this bluish line. So if I move this, it'll kind of show you where that threshold is. And then again, on the ratio, you'll see this is, so if the audio was going up this line would be like you see up here, this 1:1, that would be no compression at all. And then the ratio changes that line based off of wherever you park it. So like I said, I like to park that right around 3. So I'm going to go ahead and play this audio track. Hopefully you guys can hear it. Let me know if you can't.
McKinney with Server-Side, and today I want to talk to you about Server-Side events. These events are hosted by...
Okay, so what I'm going to do is, as this is playing, I'm going to start making some adjustments, and I'm going to kind of talk through what I'm doing. So I'm going to lower my threshold down until I start coming over here to this gain reduction, and I'll see where this gain reduction really starts to bring my peaks down. Okay, so I'm going to move that around.
These events are hosted by ourselves at headquarters.
So you'll see that pretty much every peak that I have gets reduced a little bit here. Okay, and now depending on how high that peak is will be dependent on how low that brings it down. Now, you'll notice that when I started doing that, it made the audio quieter. And that's what this makeup gain is over here. So as we bring the peaks down, it's going to make it seem quieter. So we're going to need to bring the volume up a little bit. And this is where, like what Matthew and I were saying earlier, this is kind of the knob that or the fader rather, that I use to get my speech to hover right around that -6 dB range. So you'll see over here, these meters, they have -60, -40, -30, -20, -10, and 0. Those are your dB levels. Right. So part of what I like to do with my attack, release, and hold is I like to have a little bit of that punch in the voice come through. So I'll actually take my attack and I'll slow it down. So it lets some of those peaks come through. So it lets some of the peaks come through in the audio. And then I usually like to take my release and I actually make my release really long. So that way it doesn't sound like the audio is pulsing and being actually compressed over time. So I'll go ahead and I'll play that back again.
About Server-Side events. These events are hosted by ourselves at headquarters and our Hunt Club members.
So again, you can kind of see how fast that's kicking in and then how slowly that goes back. So I'll do it like ridiculous. So if I do this super fast, or as fast as I can get it at 0.7 milliseconds, and I take my release and I put it all the way up at 4,000 milliseconds, watch how the meters change here.
These events are hosted by...
See how the meter never actually goes down?
These events are hosted by ourselves at headquarters and our...
So now if I take this release and I bring it back down again, you'll see that it'll actually go up and down.
Hosted by ourselves at headquarters and our Hunt Club members, and it's an opportunity to network.
Okay, so then again, what I would do is I would take my makeup gain, and the reason why it's called makeup gain is it is making up the gain that you've lost from your compression. And what I would do is I would take that, I would play the audio.
Today, I want to talk to you about Server-Side events. These events are hosted by ourselves at headquarters.
And we'll see that I'm trying to get my audio to sit right around here on the meter. Okay, so then as I get it up, I can then start to make some changes to my compression as well.
And our Hunt Club members, and it's an opportunity to network and engage in different hunting opportunities.
Okay, so that's kind of the base, like your kind of standards for your audio processing. Now, obviously, there are a bunch of other different things that you can do. There are effects you can add. There's all kinds of different stuff that you can do. But really, the majority of processing comes down, audio processing comes down to the compression and the EQ. Most of audio effects that you're seeing, or that you're hearing rather, are some form of compression or EQ. Okay, so now when I talk about editing audio, shifting to kind of the editing side, and I'll take it over into the edit page for this. One of the biggest things that we want to do when we're editing audio is we want to make things sound, again, natural. right? We want to make sure that everything makes as much sense as humanly possible, okay? So we would not want to make a cut in our audio in the middle of a sentence, right? And we also want to make sure that we are not putting long tails on either end of our audio. So you'll see here, like this clip in Resolve was actually a whole lot longer, and I'll actually pull this out to as long as it'll be. So we want to make sure that there's a minimal amount of what we call dead space. And by doing that, we can make it so that when we start our clip, the audio comes in almost right away. Now you'll see here on this clip, if I zoom in, I'm pressing the plus and minus button on my keyboard to zoom in and out. If I zoom in, there is a little bit of a gap here. And the reason why I did that on this particular clip, again, this is from a while ago, but what I like to do is I like to add a little bit of a fade in on both the audio and the video. And I like to do that just at the beginning, just so it's not as like harsh right at the front.
Hey, I'm Jimmy McKinney.
And as you can see, that's actually not that long of a dead space there. So as we play it, you'll see it's really not all that long. But one thing we want to make sure that we're doing is we're cutting where it makes sense. We don't usually want to cut in the middle of a sentence. So I will go ahead and I will make a cut somewhere random here. And I will shift it around. So if I make a cut there and I shift this forward to like cut out that dead space, it gets kind of weird and jumpy, right?
This is a program.
Like these are called jump cuts, and I typically like to avoid a jump cut. So like if I take this and I actually shift it more forward, you'll see kind of a little bit more of a ridiculous jump. Like that jump, I'm not a huge fan of. I know a lot of people do it, but I don't like to have jump cuts like that just because they're kind of abrasive, right? Now, this is where it comes back to what we were talking about last week with our filming and our storytelling. Obviously, sometimes there are going to be times where you're talking on camera or your subject is talking on camera and you want to cut out like an or something like that. The way we can do that to make it sound the most natural is we can actually cover those cuts with B-roll. So for instance, like if I wanted to take something that Jimmy was saying here and I wanted to cut out an or a part of a sentence and I wanted to jump it to another part, I would make that cut and then cover that cut with B-roll so that it sounds as natural as humanly possible. And it's funny when you're looking at cuts, you can hear the cut, but when you're not looking at it and you can't see like the edit timeline, then oftentimes you're not going to hear the cut or see the cut rather. So something else that you can do to kind of help you with your editing is you can take the actual audio file and you can turn the volume up so that it makes the waveform or your audio track more easy to see. This is something that I like to do as I'm editing, because the way that I edit personally, like I told you guys last week, is I cut everything together and then I go back and clean everything up. So in order to make my life easier editing wise, I like to take I don't even do any processing to the audio. All I do is I come in here, I turn the volume up on the track. And I have this mapped in my keyboard shortcuts, but you guys can do that. And actually, that is up here under Davinci Resolve under keyboard customization. Click on that. And then you can kind of set your keyboard to do whatever you want. I have mine based off of a Adobe Premiere Pro layout. That's just because that's what I learned how to edit on. And I was using Premiere Pro for years before I switched to Resolve. But that's how you change that if you want. But what you can do with those brackets on your keyboard is then you can just raise and lower the volume by 1 dB every time you click that button. So what I like to do is I like to raise that up as much as I can without actually clipping my audio source. And then that way I can easily see where all of my waveforms start and stop. So that's just a little, a little tip to make your life editing audio a little bit easier. So that's really all I have today in terms of editing and processing and capturing audio. I do want to do a follow-up for this later on, because audio can get, like, you can go down a rabbit hole for audio real quick. So if there's other things that you guys want me to teach you in terms of audio capture, audio processing, anything related to audio, go ahead and let me know. That way we can make sure that we plan those out for you guys. One thing that I probably should have said at the beginning of this webinar was that audio is arguably more important to your video than your actual video content is. People will watch a video that looks like crap, but they will not listen to a video that sounds like crap. People will tolerate poor quality video. They will not tolerate poor quality audio. So we want to make sure that we are paying close attention to what we are doing with our audio, because it is very, very, very important. Specifically in hunting videos, obviously, we're not going to be talking as loud as we normally would, and we're going to be whispering. And again, when we're processing that audio, we want to try to get the volume of that all to kind of like the same point. That's one of the biggest things that I've seen in submitted content, is whenever somebody's like trying to talk to the camera and they're whispering, it's just way, way, way too quiet. We need to boost that up. And even if you can hear it and you can understand what they're saying, sometimes whispering is hard for people to understand anyway. So it might be worth looking at adding some subtitles to that. So I don't know if I have any specific examples for like whispering content or something like that. Yeah, Matthew, it looks like you've got some experience with some pretty decent audio gear and some pretty decent cameras. If you're talking about using the FX6 there from Sony, that's a great camera. That's a phenomenal camera. And that's actually a great camera for this kind of content, because you can capture all kinds of great audio. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here, see if I can find another example of some different processing here. So actually, I do have something here, so I'll get some things shifted around here. And if you guys have any questions, go ahead and just throw them in that chat while I'm doing this. And funny enough, Torin, this is actually going to be you here on this audio. Matthew, I have the Wireless Go 2. So that is the one that has the two transmitters and the single receiver. When I usually, to be honest with you, I'm not using labs as much in the field. I use, like I said earlier, I use the Sennheiser, which is the onboard. It's not an onboard shotgun microphone, but I mount it on board and I just use the internal battery. If you guys watched the Deer Drives video, that's what I used to capture that. Was all of the audio in that was captured with that onboard Sennheiser microphone. Let's see here. So I want to show you guys one more example before I touch on the music thing, because that's actually a really good question. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen here again. So this was something that Torn and I filmed months and months and months and months and months ago that never ended up seeing the light of day. But here, unfortunately, I was silly and forgot to bring my lav microphones for this. Or actually, no, I think what happened was my lav microphone died, and that was actually my antithesis for buying the wireless Go 2. So I had to use an onboard shotgun microphone. So you'll see here that the audio is really, really low.
And this is how we're going to be set up.
So we're hovering down around that -15, -20 range. So for this, honestly, what I would do is I would take this and I would boost this probably a good, I would boost the source audio probably a good 10 dB. So I'll do that right now. So I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So that's a 10 decibel increase.
And this is how we're going to be.
And you can see that we're already getting close to that like -5, -6. We're actually hitting right around that right from the get-go. Now I could take this and I could increase it, I could lower it, I could go do all that other processing to make it sound good. But really this comes back to kind of that gain staging thing. So if I want to increase the volume of my my audio track, I would raise the audio track itself several dB, then I would raise that volume again in a compression, and then I could even come in and raise the volume with the fader down here. Now, Torrin brought up a good thing here in the chat with music. Big thing with music is you don't want it to be distracting, right? We don't want our music to take over our audio or speech audio. Now, for me, I like to use music depending on what the scenario is. So if I'm doing like a tutorial or a gear review, that music is going to be kind of like a bed, just kind of something that keeps things rolling, right? It keeps things interesting. That way it's just not straight speech. And when I'm doing something like that, every single time I will take that audio track and I will cut it down to around 30 dB, -30 dB, -25 to -30 dB. I do that on every single audio track or every single music track that I put underneath of speech audio. That way it gives the listener, it gives you enough room to hear what the voice is saying, but you also still hear that music behind it. Then if I'm using music as kind of like an overlay or like in a B-roll sequence or something like that, I will take that and I'll usually get that to again hover right around that -5, -6, -10 dB range. And that way, again, it's not way too loud because that's one thing that another thing that I've seen in submitted content and just content from other content creators all over the place is when there's changes in like whether you're going from like talking to music, sometimes that change is too drastic. So using your meters over on the side will help you make sure that you are dialing in your audio so that it's the same level across the entire board, because it's really obnoxious when you're watching a video and there's a really low part and that low part is like kind of long. So you're sitting there and you're like turning up your headphones or you're turning up your speakers or something. And then it jumps to a B-roll sequence and the music is like blowing your ear holes out. We want to make sure that we keep everything roughly the same level. Now, typically as I like bring audio or music rather in and out, I like to do that gradually. I don't like to do hard cuts in volume. I like to do nice, smooth transitions. And you can do that several different ways. You can do that with keyframing. You can do that with going in and actually editing each individual clip. Or like I showed you earlier, you can do like on the ends of the clips here in Resolve, these little points will allow you to fade things in and fade things out. So on the video side of things, this is a dip to black, which is a pretty standard transition. And then this is just a fade in here on the audio. And then this little button here lets you kind of choose the manner in which that fade in happens. Okay. All right. So any more questions as we're kind of wrapping up here? Looks like we got roughly 8 people in here. Cool. Yes, it does. Yes, it does, Matthew. I 100% agree with you. Like I said, I really like to use the Rode stuff. That's really what I started my with my video career. That's kind of where I started. I had the original what was it, the Rode Link system, which was one of their first like digital wireless audio systems. And I used that for years and years and years and years and years. And then when I found out that the wireless Go-Tos were coming out, I pre-ordered these. And I have not been disappointed with these at all. I use these for all the weddings and stuff that I shoot. I use the when we do interviews and we do talking heads, I use these as kind of like my backup source. And then I take my Tentacle Sync stuff with me wherever I go, just if I need to make sure that I'm capturing like ambient audio or something like that. I will take these, and then that way I know, like literally I can set these and forget them because they record effectively, they record raw audio. So I don't have to worry about these. I just set them and forget them. All righty. Absolutely, Zach. Like I said, if there's any other questions that you guys have on audio, just throw them in the chat here. You can email me, you can message me, whatever. I'm here to answer whatever questions you guys have. I want to try to help you guys make the best content that you can, whether that's looking at it from like a review perspective, like looking at it as kind of like you're reviewing film like we used to when we played football, you know, we're watching what we were doing, or if you want to make YouTube videos out of it. You know, I want to make sure that we are getting the best possible content that we can get and we can capture ourselves. So if you guys ever have any questions, feel free to ask. And yeah, that's kind of, that'll do it for our audio webinar. Yes, my email is, actually, I'll put it here in the chat. My email is my first initial, my last name @serviceside.com. So dwynell@serviceside.com. I'll put that right there in the chat. So Matthew said, have you ever cut your music and added cross dissolves that allow for 2 separate audio effects? So that kind of depends, right? I will do cross dissolves if I'm like changing scenes and my music hasn't quite gotten to the point in the music where I wanted to cut it out. Like if I have a scene and my music is still playing in that scene, but I want to cut it into a different scene, like a different location or something like that, I will then take that and I will fade those in and out. As far as EQ carving, I don't really do EQ carving for music. I honestly, I will, like I said, I'll just put that music down at -30 dB, and then it doesn't really need to be carved out for EQ. The only time I would really ever, quote unquote, carve out for EQ is if there was vocals in the track, like while there was talking. But I try to avoid that anyway, because that gets real distracting real quick when there's like singing going on and somebody's trying to talk over top of that. Then you're trying to listen to what the words of the music are and what the person is saying, and it just doesn't work. So like I said, I like to bring that down to like 30 dB, and then that's where I kind of leave it. So, all righty. Oh, apparently I don't even know my own email. It is dan@serviceside.com. But yeah, again, if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out. But other than that, that's gonna wrap up the audio webinar. We will next week be talking about, I believe, editing, correct, Justin and Torin? Frank, the program for editing is Davinci Resolve. That's the program that I'm using. Oh yes, I'm gonna actually give a little bit of a tutorial next week on Davinci Resolve. So I'm gonna walk through the main processes in Davinci Resolve, as well as kind of breaking down editing just in general. So if you guys are new to Davinci Resolve, you've never used Davinci Resolve, any of that stuff, make sure that you are here next week. I'm going to go over all of that, and I'm also going to go over kind of the basis of editing as well, editing videos as well. So what we'll talk about next week will be, it'll encompass pretty much all of the editing programs, but again, I will be working specifically in Davinci Resolve from now on. Yes, Matthew, I actually do have an M1 Max that runs Davinci Resolve, and it is the best computer I've ever had. It's the best editing system I've ever had. But yeah, so the registration link for next week, for next Monday, will be on our socials tomorrow. So make sure you guys are looking at that. And as for now, that's going to do it. And hopefully I will see you guys all next week. All right. See you guys.